Yo, what's up? Welcome back to another episode of the SWS College Football Week 11. We're on to Friday night, and we got 4 games. I'm only going to go through 3 of them. I don't really know what I think about that Mountain West game, the New Mexico-San Diego State. I kind of want to take the 3 points with New Mexico, but I'm not going to go through it because I haven't really followed those teams closely enough. So I'm just going to go through the first 3. I do have 2 bets, so let's get into it.
Welcome to the SWS. The SWS. Hey, get the SWS.
First up, we're in the ACC. We got Cal on the road at Wake Forest. Demon Deacons catching 7 points at home, total sitting at 54.5. Let's take a look at the pie charts, and according to the data, Wake might be looking like a public dog here, kind of tilting back towards 50-50 though. As of Wednesday morning, 55% of the tickets coming in on Wake, just over 50% of the money. Line was at 7.5, now seems to be sitting mostly at 7. So let's get into this matchup, and we'll start with the Cal offense against the Wake defense. Should be a very favorable spot for Mendoza here. Cal's had a pretty solid passing attack this season, 24th in yards per pass attempt, 47th in success rate per dropback, 41st in effective pass. Matched up against a Wake Forest defense that, I mean, if you follow ACC football, you know that Wake hasn't been the best defensive team this year. 102nd in the country in yards per play, 133rd in success rate. So they're struggling to get off the field. Should be a good matchup for Mendoza and the Cal passing attack. Wake Forest has no pass rush, 115th in pressure rate, 94th in sack rate, 109th in pass rush grade. Finally, a matchup where Cal's offensive line, who's been struggling, by the way, could win some battles because Cal's offensive line hasn't played well. Wake's defensive line strikes fear into nobody, so Mendoza should have time to throw here, and when he's been given a clean pocket, he excels. Look at the left side of this graphic. When given a clean pocket, Mendoza can definitely make the throws. In the last 5 games, Cal's averaging over 303 passing yards per game, 44.6% success rate per dropback, 8.88 yards per pass attempt. And look at the opponents: Florida State, Miami, Pitt, NC State, and Oregon State. Of those 5 opponents, 4 of them have significantly better defenses than Wake Forest. I would say Oregon State, Wake Forest is probably slightly better defensively, but the other 4 teams, significantly better defense than Wake Forest. Not to mention, this Wake Forest defense has been getting absolutely cooked in their home games. In their 4 home games, they're allowing over 40 points per game. 40.3 points allowed per game, 53.8% success rate. So again, they can't get off the field. 7.2 yards per play allowed. I'm going to keep repeating this. I like this matchup for Mendoza. He should have a big game throwing the ball. Now, in terms of run support, as I'm sure you probably know, Cal's run game has been just broken this year. Jaden Ott was banged up, but even when he's healthy on the field, hasn't been very effective running the ball. In their last 5 games, they're averaging just 2.93 yards per carry, 37.1% success rate per rush, under 96 rushing yards per game. And like I said earlier, the offensive line is certainly not doing them any favors, not creating a ton of space in the run game. So even though Wake Forest defensively not strong against the run, I don't know if Mendoza's going to have run support, but regardless, I like the matchup for him. He's going to have opportunities to make big plays through the air, and I personally think he's going to make them. But what about on the other side? Will Wake Forest be able to score points on the Cal defense? Well, California's been a solid defensive team this year. 17th in yards per play, 47th in success rate, strong against the run, even stronger against the pass. They're actually sitting at 15th in effective pass this year. DFEI has them at 23rd. So some people consider this to be a top 25 defense. The thing is, Wake Forest has not been a terrible offensive team. Big game Hank Bachmeier, he's having himself a pretty solid season. They're 93rd in yards per play, 43rd in success rate. Rushing numbers, not great. Look at the passing numbers, though. These aren't bad. 78th in yards per pass attempt, 58th in success rate per dropback, 55th in effective pass. Like I said, big game Hank having himself a decent season here. 1,947 yards, 7.4 yards per pass attempt, 12 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, an A turnover-worthy play rate, which is huge. If you watched Hank Bachmeier at Louisiana Tech last year, you know that interceptions were a problem. So he's protecting the football here at Wake Forest. Last 2 games were successful ones, throwing the ball. 259.5 passing yards per game, 7.9 yards per attempt, 44.9% success rate per dropback. Yes, we do have to consider the opponents, UConn and Stanford. Stanford's pass defense is terrible. UConn's defense has actually been pretty solid, but still, that's on UConn standards. This is in the ACC. So yes, It was against lesser opponents. Now, when it comes to Cal's defense against the pass, it's a tough unit to get a feel for. First of all, they've been great against the run. If you look at the middle column of this graphic, they've played great defense against the run in basically every single one of their games. Miami maybe made some plays on the ground a little bit, but as a whole, this has been a great defensive front defending the run. Against the pass is a little tougher. If you look at the right side of this graphic, they were absolutely excellent in 6 of their games. Miami and NC State both had huge games throwing the ball on them. Miami's understandable, maybe the best passing attack in the country, but CJ Bailey and NC State, a little concerning. I mean, if CJ Bailey's able to have a big game throwing the ball on Cal, maybe big game Hank is as well. Here's the problem though, and here's why I will not be putting any money on big game Hank in this spot. What does Cal do defensively? They run a lot of man coverage. 24th in the country in man coverage frequency. They're pretty good at it as well. Big game Hank, all his production has come against zone. Look at the left side of the Wake Forest graphic here. That's the Wake Forest passing numbers against man coverage. Terrible. So Cal runs a lot of man coverage. Big game Hank has not shown us he could beat man coverage, which is why it has to be Cal here at an even 7 on the road. I don't love it. Cal -7. Let's do it. Next game. Rice Owls on the road at Memphis. Memphis laying 9 points at home. Total sitting at 50, pretty much 51 across the board here. Let's take a look at the pie charts. According to the data, over 60% of the tickets coming in on Memphis, over 65% of the money coming in on Rice. As I always say, take it with a grain of salt. So let's get into this matchup, and we'll start with the Rice Owl offense, which has been such a disappointing unit this year. A lot of people, including myself, were expecting Rice to be a solid offense this year. They bring in E.J. Warner from Temple, who was considered to be a borderline NFL talent. Rice brought back a lot of production on the offensive side. The passing attack has just been so inefficient. 129th in yards per pass attempt, 121st in success rate per dropback. This offense is 124th in OFEI. This whole experiment with E.J. Warner has just been a failure so far, and they're on the road against a Memphis defense that's been surprisingly good. Memphis is not a defensive program. This has been offense first all the way the last few years. They lost their DC in the offseason too, so I was not expecting much from the Memphis defense this year, and they've been pretty good. 76 in yards per play, 30th in success rate. Pretty solid against the run, pretty solid against the pass. This isn't an elite defense by any stretch, but compared to the Memphis defenses we're used to seeing, this is excellent. So will Memphis be able to continue their great defensive season here against Rice? Well, Rice likes to throw the ball. Like I said, they brought in E.J. Warner to play quarterback, Kurt Warner's son. They're second in pass frequency, and like I said, he's not having the best year. 6.1 yards per pass attempt, 11 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, an F in big-time throw rate. The big plays through the air just haven't been there for E.J. Warner and the Rice offense, and this Memphis defense has been playing the pass well. In their last 4 games, they're allowing 294 passing yards per game, success rate per dropback under 39%, 7.35 yards per pass attempt. That's against South Florida, North Texas, Charlotte, okay, on UTSA. Those are some offenses that can move the ball, that can throw the ball. Memphis is playing some great defense, man. And if you're wondering if Rice is going to have run support in this game, think again. In their last 4 games, they're averaging under 3.4 yards per carry, 37.8% success rate per rush, 78.8 rushing yards per game. They don't run the ball much. When they do, it doesn't really work. So I don't expect any run support to be there for E.J. Warner either. As a whole, I mean, I don't know how we can trust the Rice offense based on what they've shown us so far this season. Memphis has played the pass well. Should be another rough outing for the Rice offense in this one. But what about on the other side of the ball? Let's take a look at the Memphis offense against the Rice defense. And everything I just said about the Rice offense being disappointed, you can say the opposite about the defense. This Rice defense has exceeded all expectations. 28th in yards per play, 10th in success rate, decent numbers against the run, great numbers against the pass, which is going to come in handy on the road against Seth Hennigan and the Memphis offense. This Memphis offense certainly not having the season we were expecting. Bringing Seth Hennigan back at quarterback, we are expecting a pretty high-powered unit, and you know what? It looks like they are coming around in the last few games. On the season, though, look at the passing numbers. This is a pass-first offense. They're 89th in yards per pass attempt, 84th in success rate per dropback. So the pass game hasn't been nearly as efficient with Seth Hennigan as they were expecting it to be. And like I said, Rice is playing some defense. In their last 4 games, they're allowing just 19.5 points per game, 33.8% success rate per dropback, 4.69 yards per play. Now, when you look at the opponents, UConn and Navy are in there, 2 teams that don't/can't throw the ball. UTSA and Tulane, though. Those teams, well, Tulane's more of a rushing offense too, but UTSA can throw the ball with McGowan. Here's where this game gets interesting. Is the Memphis offense back? In their last 3 games, they're averaging over 40 points per game, over 44% success rate, 6.57 yards per play, looking like the Memphis offense we were expecting to see coming into the season. Here's why it's a tough call to make. It was against North Texas, Charlotte, UTSA. 3 bad defenses. Rice defensively has been head and shoulders better than these 3 teams. So is the Memphis offense back, or did they have a 3-game stretch against some bad defenses? It's really tough call. Personally, I think the move here is to go under. It's at 51.5. I haven't placed a bet yet. The reason I haven't, I'm a little worried that both these teams throw the ball a lot, which results in the clock stopping, quicker possessions, more possessions. So I'm a little worried about that. But personally, I like the matchup for both defenses. I think coming into the season, we were expecting these teams to both be offensive programs. They're not. Both teams' defense have been better than both teams' offense. So I can see the defenses reigning supreme here. 51.5 is a high number for that type of game. But like I said, if both teams are going to be dropping back to pass 40 times, makes it tough to stay under 51.5. So my pick for the game is 51.5 under. Haven't bet it yet. I'll let you know on the live show if I pull the trigger on it. Next game, Iowa is out west for their first West Coast Big Ten game at UCLA here. UCLA catching 6 or 6.5 points at home, depending on your sports book. Take a look at the pie charts, and according to the data, action's coming in pretty heavily on the Hawkeyes side. Over 80% of the tickets, 85% of the money coming in on Iowa. Take this data with a grain of salt. So let's get into this matchup, and we'll start with the Iowa offense. And we know what this Hawkeyes offense is. They run the ball early, run the ball often, and they're pretty damn good at it. 8th in yards per carry, 42nd in success rate per rush, 3rd in effective rush. Offensively as a whole, they're sitting at 33rd in OFEI, and that's because they don't have a passing attack at all. But their run game is about as good as it gets. This is a top 10 rushing attack in the country. So the question we have to answer is, can UCLA limit the Iowa run game? They're 13th in the country in yards per carry allowed, but 111th in success rate, meaning they're having trouble getting off the field, even though they're limiting the big runs. Iowa's coming into this one off a dominant performance on the ground last week against Wisconsin. 330 rushing yards, 6.23 yards per carry. It was against Wisconsin. It's not like they played UTEP. It's a solid Big Ten program. They ran all over them. So Iowa offensively coming into this one with some momentum. But you know what? Let's give UCLA some credit. Again, 49.6% success rate per rush isn't great, but in their last 7 games, there's some good offenses in here. Oregon, Penn State, Indiana, LSU, Minnesota. Well, Minnesota's more of a passing offense. Rutgers can run the ball. Nebraska. In their last 7 games against those teams, just 3.51 yards per carry allowed. 107.4 rushing yards allowed per game. Now, 49% success rate per rush indicates they're having trouble getting off the field when teams run the ball, but they're limiting these offenses. They're not getting absolutely cooked on the ground like that. And you know what? Iowa's last 2 games, that game against Wisconsin where they went off, both at home. Look at their last 2 road games against Ohio State and Michigan State. Just under 5 yards per carry, 124.5 rushing yards per game, just 28.3% success rate per rush, indicating they were struggling to move the chains on the ground in those 2 games. So their last 2 road games, Iowa's offense didn't look nearly as good. And I know some people are thinking Iowa's offense has some new energy, got a boost from the quarterback change. And I mean, I get why people think that. In their last 2 games with Sullivan starting, 41 points per game, over 6 yards per play, 44.6% success rate. But almost none of that has come through the air. It's all on the ground. So personally, I don't think this really moves the needle for me. And like I said, both of those games were at home. Now they go on the road, and not just on the road, they're making their first cross-country Big Ten trip. And based on what we've seen so far this year, teams are struggling with that. So as a whole on this side of the ball, as dominant as Iowa's run game has been, I don't really love the matchup for them out here on the West Coast. But what about the other side? What about the Iowa defense? Obviously, as we know, the strength of the team hasn't been quite as good of the Iowa defense of years past, but still a great defense. 48th in yards per play, 66th in success rate. 38th in yards per carry, 94th in success rate per rush, 36th in yards per pass attempt, 48th in success rate per dropback. Up against a UCLA offense that out of nowhere has a pretty damn good passing attack. They're sitting at 45th in yards per pass attempt, 54th in success rate per dropback, 13th in effective pass. Is it crazy to think that UCLA might be able to make throws and score points on the Iowa defense? I mean, Iowa's defense hasn't looked nearly as good on the road. In their 3 road games against Minnesota, Ohio State, Michigan State, they're allowing 27 points per game, over 50% success rate, 6 yards per play. Those are not good defensive numbers. So Iowa's defense on the road hasn't been nearly the same as their defense at home at Kinnick. And like I said before, UCLA, out of nowhere, is looking like they have some dynamite passing attack with Ethan Garbers. Through the first 5 games, UCLA was looking like one of the worst Power 4 offenses. I mean, they were looking terrible. 197.4 passing yards per game, success rate per dropback under 35%, just 6.34 yards per pass attempt. Look at the passing numbers from their last 3 games. Against Minnesota, Rutgers' defense isn't great. Nebraska, just under 300 passing yards per game, 9 yards per attempt, success rate per dropback over 56%. Last one was on the road at Nebraska in bad weather. I mean, this UCLA passing attack is dangerous. Iowa's defense hasn't been the same on the road. I think they're going to move the ball on Iowa, and personally, I think UCLA might be live here. I took the 6.5. I got UCLA plus 6.5 in this one. Like I said before, I'm not going to go through the last game, the Mountain West game, San Diego State. I kind of like New Mexico plus the points, but I'm going to save it. We'll talk about it on the live show. Maybe if one of the guests can talk me into it. But as of right now, I'm just going to pass on this one for now. Live show, 4 p.m. Eastern time. We'll go through the college football games. We'll go through the NBA games. We'll go through the college basketball games. All of that. If you're able to make it, we'd love to see you in the comments. If you want to see all the bets I currently have open, head over to KyleKirms.com and click on open bets. You'll see all mine as well as everyone on the staff here. Let's have ourselves a good Friday night. Please remember to bet responsibly. Talk to you in the Discord.